It's June 19th, 1865 in Galveston Bay, Texas. Major General Gordon Granger and his men are here to enforce President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation by general order. See, while the Confederacy was mostly defeated, with General Robert E. Lee surrendering to General Ulysses S. Grant 2 months prior, there were still some Confederate holdouts in the territory of Texas. So when General Granger and his 2,000 men rolled up into what we call today the Lone Star State, they were there to inform the over 250,000 enslaved people in the territory that they were no longer under someone's ownership. General Order Number 3 stated that, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves the absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former master and slaves, and the connection existing between that of an employer and free laborer." This message would mark an important day in American history, as now all enslaved people are informed of their freedom in every state of the Confederacy. And now June 19th, now known today as Juneteenth, has been regarded by many as this nation's second Independence Day. This message would usher in a new era of celebrations and opportunities for a group of people that didn't have many before. But General Order Number 3 will make way for another important message over 100 years later, at a turning point for a young nation, in a pair of speeches often regarded as some of the best in American history, and they would be given by a young black woman from Texas.
It was 144 years ago that members of the Democratic Party first met in convention to select a presidential candidate. Since that time, Democrats have continued to convene once every 4 years and draft a party platform and nominate a presidential candidate. And our meeting this week is a continuation of that tradition. But there is something different about tonight. There is something special about tonight. What is different? What is special? I, Barbara Jordan, am a keynote speaker.
We come from innovators, heroes, and royalty. We are our ancestors' greatest hope. We face many challenges, but we mold that adversity into our greatest strength. We are the glue that holds a nation together and allows it to flourish. Welcome to Black is America, the podcast that highlights little-known African-American figures and stories that make our history come to life. I'm your host, Dominic Lawson. Episode 4, Barbara Jordan, the protector of American democracy. Today is Juneteenth, a day not just for African Americans, but for all Americans to be reminded that no one is free until everyone is free. But it's a day of celebrations, events, parades, and cookouts. I see you, Unc, over there on the grill. I'll be over later for a plate after I finish talking to the good people over here. Now, Juneteenth has been celebrated all over the country, but for obvious reasons, it began in Texas to the story I shared earlier. But a few years ago, the federal government created a pathway for us to celebrate it even more. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris.
Throughout history, Juneteenth has been known by many names: Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, Emancipation Day, and today, a national holiday.
Now, Juneteenth has many symbols, but none more prevalent than its flag. It's a beautiful flag that has many symbols itself and was created by activist Ben Haith in 1997. He sometimes goes as Boston Ben. For one is the colors themselves, red, white, and blue. This represents the descendants of enslaved people who are indeed Americans. Quick programming note. On Black is America, you may hear me refer to enslaved people as opposed to saying slaves. That is because calling them slaves is more like that's their identity. And as we know, we are so much more than that. So in saying enslaved people, I'm reinforcing the notion that we were great and amazing people who so happened to become enslaved, as opposed to our people just being identified as slaves. But speaking of slavery, did you know that at its peak, slavery was a $4 billion industry? It was bigger than the railroad and construction combined. Adjusted for inflation, that is $10 trillion. Yeah, trillion with the T. That today, on its own, would be the third largest economy in the world, behind the United States and China. And that's why I love this joke.
Okay, class, what was the first Black-owned business? Yes.
United States of America.
No,
See, obviously you can't see it, but when the professor says no, he quickly does a double take like, man, you actually might be onto something. Anyways, also on the Juneteenth flag is the star that represents Texas, obviously because that's where it started. I'll circle back around to that in a little while. But around the star is the bursting star inspired by the nova, which means a new start. That represents the new beginning for our people. This leads to the arc in the middle of the flag that represents the opportunities and promises that lay ahead for us. And that leads us back to that star that represents Texas, because that would be the state that was home to one of the biggest political figures in American history. And had that story not gone down on June 19, 1865, would have never even been possible. Barbara Charlene Jordan was born on February 21, 1936 in Houston, Texas, to a family that felt strongly about education and their faith. It is with her family that she understood that a person with conviction and fortitude can change the world, no matter where those beginnings were, which include a Jim Crow segregated Texas. Now, Auntie Barbara grew up to be an exemplary student. Graduating from Phyllis Wheatley High School, she would then go on to earn her bachelor's degree at the HBCU Texas Southern University and a law degree from Boston University in 1959. She would then begin to practice law in 1960 in her home of Houston, Texas. And it is here Auntie Barbara got an urge to take her career to a new arena.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man for president?
John Fitzgerald Kennedy ran for president in 1960 against Richard Nixon, and Auntie Barbara would run the campaign effort in Houston, getting out the vote in the African American precincts. The demographics in Houston were changing, and it trended African American, and Senator Kennedy needed every vote he could get in Texas. And as you know, Kennedy would win the election, thereby raising the profile of Auntie Barbara in the political arena in Texas. And as for Nixon, well, this won't be the last time you hear about him in this story. From there, Barbara Jordan would run for office herself. She ran unsuccessfully for the Texas House of Representatives in '62 and in '64, but would become a Texas state senator in 1966. In doing so, Auntie Barbara becomes the first African-American state senator since 1883 and the first Black woman elected to the Texas state legislature. And as soon as she did, she got to work. She pushed through the state's first minimum wage law and the Texas Fair Employment Practices Commission. And on March 28, 1972, Auntie was elected to President Pro Tem of Texas. This gave her the powers of the governor of Texas when the acting governor and lieutenant governor were out of the state. This move makes her the first Black woman in America to preside over a governing body in a state. But another position was calling. See, due to the 1970 census, a congressional district was redrawn in Houston, which included downtown Houston. The new district was 55% Black and 15% Latino. And so this newly redrawn district would need a new leader, one who had the experience and knew the needs of the people. Auntie Barbara would take the seat handedly, winning 80% of the vote, and she was ready to make her mark. She said during a campaign rally once, quote, "I'll be one of 435 representatives, but the other 434 will know I'm there." And once again, just as she did in Texas, she rose in power and in influence. See, in Congress, it's all about the committees that you serve on. That's where the true power is. Auntie used her influence to land a place on the Judiciary Committee. Now, this committee has been called the lawyer of the House of Representatives because of its jurisdiction over matters relating to the administration of justice in federal courts, administrative bodies, and law enforcement agencies. Auntie Barbara, since she was young, was taught that having conviction and standing up for what is right is important, whether it be at the local market in Houston or in the halls of Congress. And in the summer of 1974, Barbara Jordan's conviction would be on full display for the nation to see.
Good evening. Now that most of the major witnesses in the Watergate phase of the Senate committee hearings on campaign practices have been heard, the time has come for me to speak out about the charges made and to provide a perspective on the issue for the American people. For over 4 months,
Richard Nixon, remember the 1960 Republican nominee for president? Yeah, he would eventually become president in 1968 and win re-election in 1972. But some of the practices on how he gained that re-election were suspect, as you know. Watergate, impeachment hearings, and the whole nine. But you know, when impeachment hearings happens, committees get together and give speeches, and it seems right up the alley of something called, what is that thing called? Yeah, the Judiciary Committee, which is why on July 25th, 1974, Auntie Barbara had something to say about the president's actions and how to proceed.
Earlier today, we heard the beginning of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. We the people. It's a very eloquent beginning. But when that document was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people. Today I am an inquisitor, and hyperbole would not be fictional and would not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total. And I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution.
Now, one thing you need to know about Auntie Barbara is that she is a pragmatist. While she was a member of the Democratic Party, she often broke with her party if she felt it served the common good of everyone. She once voted against oil and gas deregulation that her party was not in favor of. And when it comes to impeachments, political factions tend to use it for gain, personal and party-wide. And Auntie Barbara wasn't going to have any of that on her watch.
The drawing of political lines goes to the motivation behind impeachment. But impeachment must proceed within the confines of the constitutional term high crime and misdemeanors. Of the impeachment process, it was Woodrow Wilson who said that nothing short of the grossest offenses against the plain law of the land will suffice to give them speed and effectiveness. Indignation so great as to overgrow party interest may secure a conviction, but nothing else can. Common sense would be revolted if we engaged upon this process for petty reasons. Congress has a lot to do. Appropriations, tax reform, health insurance, campaign finance reform, housing, environmental protection, energy sufficiency, mass transportation. Pettiness cannot be allowed to stand in the face of such overwhelming problems. So today we're not being petty. We're trying to be big because the task we have before us is a big one.
Like I said, when it comes to the Congresswoman, she has always been beholden to the Constitution. And with that being said, there were absolute concerns to the possibility of impeachment. And Auntie used one of the most powerful tools a lawyer, and in my experience, a black woman has, which is juxtaposition, because Auntie Barbara had receipts.
This morning, in a discussion of the evidence, we're told that the evidence which purports to support the allegations of misuse of the CIA by the president is thin. We're told that that evidence is insufficient. What that recital of the evidence this morning did not include is what the president did know on June the 23rd, 1972. The president did know that it was Republican money, that it was money from the Committee for the Re-election of the President, which was found in the possession of one of the burglars arrested on June the 17th. What the president did know on the 23rd of June was the prior activities of E. Howard Hunt, which included his participation in the break-in of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist, which included Howard Hunt's participation in the Dita Beard ITT affair, which included Howard Hunt's fabrication of cables designed to discredit the Kennedy administration. At this point, I would like to juxtapose a few of the impeachment criteria with some of the actions the president has engaged in. Impeachment criteria: James Madison, from the Virginia Ratification Convention. If the president be connected in any suspicious manner with any person and there be grounds to believe that he will shelter him, he may be impeached. We have heard time and time again that the evidence reflects the payment to defendants, money. The president had knowledge that these funds were being paid, and these were funds collected for the 1972 presidential campaign. We know that the president met with Mr. Henry Peterson 27 times to discuss matters related to Watergate, and immediately thereafter met with the very persons who were implicated in the information Mr. Peterson was receiving. The words are, if the president is connected in any suspicious manner with any person, and there be grounds to believe that he will shelter that person, he may be impeached. A president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution. If the impeachment provision in the Constitution of the United States will not reach the offenses charged here, then perhaps that 18th century Constitution should be abandoned to a 20th century paper shredder.
This impeachment speech thrust Barbara Jordan into the national spotlight as a rock star. She would receive letters from all over the country and across party lines praising her absolute surgical process of laying out the facts and providing the American people a lesson on the Constitution. And if it was that speech that had her protecting America from its wrongdoings, then it would be her next speech at the DNC convention 2 years later that laid out the plan of what America could be moving forward. And boy, was it needed.
This is by far the biggest ovation anyone has received here in this opening session of the Democratic Convention. At this time, the convention has really come alive on this first night. For Barbara Jordan, Congresswoman, Sunday.
Jimmy Carter was in a close election with Gerald Ford during the 1976 election, and they needed some help on opening night of the convention. See, America was changing. Its demographics were changing, its politics was changing, and the country needed a reminder of learning from the lessons of the past, but also the hard work it will take to shape its future.
We are a people in a quandary about the present. We are a people in search of our future. We are a people in search of a national community. We are a people trying not only to solve the problems of the present, unemployment, inflation, but we are attempting on a larger scale to fulfill the promise of America. We are attempting to fulfill our national purpose to create and sustain a society in which all of us are equal. Our concept of governing is derived from our view of people. It is a concept deeply rooted in a set of beliefs firmly etched in the national conscience of all of us. Now, what are these beliefs? First, we believe in equality for all and privileges for none.
I think the reason I like Barbara Jordan is not just her pragmatism or her voice, which sounds absolutely regal when you hear her speak. It is that even as a black woman and everything that has happened in this nation to people who look like her, she still has held on to this belief of what America could be. And as I celebrate Juneteenth today and the 4th of July a few weeks later, I hold on to that. It's the greatest experiment known to man, in my opinion. And she was so prescient with her words, because what she said in 1976 are still relevant today.
Many fear the future, many are distrustful of their leaders and believe that their voices are never heard. Many seek only to satisfy their private wants, to satisfy their private interests. But this is the great danger America faces, that we will cease to be one nation and become instead a collection of interest groups. City against suburb, region against region, individual against individual, each seeking to satisfy private wants. If that happens, who then will speak for America? Who then will speak for the common good? This is the question which must be answered in 1976.
And clearly in 2023 as well. Auntie understood the assignment in 1976. She showed America a glimpse of what it could be, and she helped to get President Carter elected, just as she did President Kennedy 16 years before. Jimmy Carter himself said that he was glad that his speech was 3 days after Auntie's, because he didn't want to directly follow that one. And when Carter gave his DNC speech, people were calling for him to make Auntie Barbara his running mate. But no, we didn't get a black woman as Madam Vice President in 1976, but we did get one in 2020. And in the past couple of years, we have seen more black women than ever before rise to new political heights. Stacey Abrams of Georgia and others come to mind. And they all know they were catapulted on the shoulders of Barbara Jordan, who did not let growing up in the segregated South stop her to reach the biggest stages in American politics. The daughter of Texas shows us that through pragmatism and attention to detail, that you can change the course of history. And that is why Barbara Jordan is the protector of American democracy. The Black is America podcast, a presentation of Owl's Education Company, was created and is written, researched, and produced by me, Dominic Lawson. Executive producer, Kendall Lawson. Cover art was created by Alexandria Eddings of Art Life Connections. Sources to create this episode include the New York Times, CBS News, the U.S. House of Representatives Archives, and the Texas Southern University Barbara Jordan Archives. Be sure to like, review, and subscribe to Black is America on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Also, let us know what you think about the podcast. We would really appreciate it. For a full transcript of this episode and other resources, go to www.blackisamericapodcast.com. There, you can read our blog, leave us a review, or you can leave us a voicemail where you can ask a question or let us know what you think about the show that we may play in a later episode. Thank you so much for listening to the award-winning Black is America podcast, where our history comes to life. Until next time.